scary stories. My boyfriend and I are a young couple in their mid-college years. We decided that we wanted to get away from work and our studies for the weekend, so we took a trip to the nearest hiking trail that is part of the Appalachian Mountain Trail. We decided to leave on Friday once I got off work and backpack on the trail in order to camp there over the weekend. I work in a restaurant, and it is very difficult to have a set time of when I'm going to leave work. I ended up leaving work around 4 p.m., but we said that no matter what, we would be going on this trip. We finally left for the trail, and we began hiking around 5:30. My boyfriend was an Eagle Scout, so we had all the necessary supplies for a successful camping trip: tent, sleeping bags, sleeping pads, pots, pans, stove, clothes, food, of course, necessary substances to free our minds after the long hike. The first part of the hike was absolutely exhausting. If not many of you know, a shelter on this trail is a 10-foot by 15-foot approximately long cabin that only has 3 walls, and it is open to the outside. It's specifically used as shelter to sleep in or hide from the rain. Midway through the hike, it began to pour dramatically in the forest. Sooner or later, we were both soaked from head to toe. Thick fog grew quickly. As it had been a hot and humid Friday, the trail became very slippery, and our pace slowed down tremendously. We had hoped that we were getting closer to the camping site, but it turned dark very, very quickly. We took a rest in the dark as it poured on us in hopes that we would find our headlamps. Once we found our headlamps, we placed them on our heads, still struggling to balance ourselves on top of the rocky and muddy path. I thought that by that point, we had never made it to the shelter. We walked, never giving up, although I wanted to. As my socks and shoes were wet, I was tired, hungry, drenched, and cold. The temperature had dropped more than 25 degrees as we had made our way up. It was around 8:30 when we finally made it through to the second shelter and campgrounds. There was a split in the path. Either you could walk straight to continue to the top of the view, you could turn slightly right to walk to the campgrounds, or you could take a 90-degree turn to the right to walk down to the shelter. At that point, we were both drenched from head to toe and needed to dry off. It was still raining to beat the band, so it would have been nearly impossible to set up our tent and camp. We had decided we would stay, put up the shelter until the rain calmed down. We didn't hear anyone at the shelter, so I was extremely excited to have the place to ourselves and take a few tokes. After our hike, I was dead set on it. Once we walked down to the shelter and got to the opening, there was a man and a woman in their 60s. We instantly thought to ourselves that they were an older married couple who wanted to get away for the weekend too. We told them that we wouldn't be bothering them for long, so we wet our backpacks down and attempted to dry off. The couple were very welcoming, with a lantern and an absorbing towel for me to dry off. My boyfriend and I took our shirts off since they were both carrying a lot of weight and water. The couple seemed to be very normal, and the man brought a cute dog with him that I enjoyed playing with. We both began introducing ourselves with our names, where we were from, and what we were doing there. They both said that they were in their 60s. Their names were Joe and Maya, and that they were just messing around for the weekend. In between sentences, they were taking large gulps of what looked like alcohol in their water pack. They said that they were just having fun and met online, which veered off into dropping hints that they were there on the trail having an affair. The older woman says that she comes from West Virginia. Strikes me to be very off. It began with her looks, having scraggly, shoulder-length gray hair, with circular glasses resting on her face. Her teeth were very dark, nearly covered with a brown film. As if she had used hard drugs in the past, she wore pullover hiking boots and jean shorts that nearly exposed everything. Joe, on the other hand, was just an average white male who had gray hair and was a tad overweight. They spoke about their past employments and what they had done in life. Maya said that she was a writer, which I did admire. Information about ourselves was exchanged too, since they seemed very friendly. I was in a very bad mood, though, and very irritable until I smoked one. My boyfriend and I periodically showed each mother our phones in order to communicate, as we didn't have a bit of service in the shelter we were at. We agreed that it was okay if we started smoking since they were becoming drunk. They said that they didn't mind, but would like to join. I thought it was absolutely insane that they wanted to smoke too at that age. The man only took 2 hits, but the woman took many, and was struggling a lot to even flick the lighter. Joe and my husband began their own conversation, and the woman and I veered off on our own as well. The woman began asking me to tell her a story. As she inched closer and closer to me, she would ask me to tell her a story. She grew more and more demanding, saying, "Tell me a story." My boyfriend and I met online, just as they said they did, so I was going to tell her about the story of how we met. I began the story with, "So, you met him online, right?" She nearly cuts me off, and more aggressively says, "What? Why would you say that?" I said again, "Earlier Joe said y'all met online, didn't you?" She then nearly shouts and growls, "Why the fuck would you say that?" I jumped away from the conversation so quickly, so I asked her, "Well, you're a writer, right? So why don't you tell me one of your best stories?" The woman becomes very happy and giggly, and while swirling her hands around her head in the air, she said, "Well, I'm a writer. In my mind." I was extremely confused and creeped out. I didn't know what to say. I'm the type of person to laugh at all, so that's what I did. She just said she enjoyed being a writer in my mind. I look over at my boyfriend and Joe's conversation, and it seemed to be as normal as it could be. There was absolutely nothing wrong about it, but Maya nearly gave me the chills as she got my attention, getting closer into my face, asking me what I was saying. The problem was that I wasn't saying anything. I was absolutely silent, ignoring her. She began talking to herself. She would make very in-depth hand gestures as she spoke to herself, then would ask me what I was saying to her. I wasn't saying a word, and she would wonder what I was telling her. She would abruptly say, "Yes, no, maybe, no way, yeah, it can't, wait, huh?" As she would rock back and forth, waving her arms around, she began crossing her legs and holding her arms up in the air above her head. She started to shout, "Coming out, I'm coming out, all of you come." She was nearly talking gibberish. The older man's attention was caught, and he asked her what in the hell she was doing. She said, "I'm calling out, it's witchcraft." I was nearly high and terrified of all of my surroundings. It stormed loudly in the background and was pitch black all around us. A small lamplight rested on a beam above our heads in the middle of the wooden shelter. I was wet and very vulnerable. Everything slowly began to get worse that night. Maya kept slurring her words, and the man demanded she get in her sleeping bag and sleep. I sat against the wall next to my boyfriend very closely as the man crawled into his sleeping bag, and Maya attempted to pull her legs into the sleeping bag, but couldn't. She moved around for a very long time, and finally curled up next to Joe onto her sleeping bag. She was probably freezing, as it was 35 degrees by 9:30. Only a few minutes passed, and we heard Maya whisper. Maya said angrily, "What did you give me?" She growls again. "What did you fucking give me?" The man finally woke up and demanded, "What?" Maya hits back and yells, "What did you fucking give me?" She jumps up immediately, facing us. Her eyes were nearly all black, as her pupils were so enlarged she looked nearly sadistic, and yelled at us, "What did he give me?" My boyfriend and I both tensed up, nearly losing our shit. She screams, "What did he give me?" even louder, as her voice screeched into my eardrums. She once again turned around to the man lying down behind him. She slowly whispers into his ear, softly growling, "Did you give me acid?" It began to run through my mind that he had drugged her, or she was having a flashback, or a bad trip. Joe attempted to calm her down, but she was still restless. She laid down for approximately 5 minutes, but Maya immediately sat up. She faced us, with her legs crossed. She stared at us, without breaking contact, for at least 5 minutes. She did this every so often, sitting up, staring at us, then laying back down. She would do this over and over and over again. So we decided to leave immediately. We finally made our way out as she stared at us for one last time. We pitched camp as far away as possible, but I remained sleepless that night in fear Maya would find out where our tent was and crawl into it. This happened last summer. I was playing video games when my mom asked me to come downstairs. It was the late afternoon, and since she was cooking dinner, she asked me to take something to the mailbox, so I did just that. I put on my shoes and went outside, letter in hand, not taking a phone or anything with me. I crossed the street and made my way to the four-way intersection at the end of the block, close to where the mailbox is. That's when I noticed him. There was a man in a car on the other side of the intersecting street. I was about to cross. He looked about mid-60s in age, white, bald, and terrifying. He just sat there, staring at me and his black SUV. I could sense something was wrong. I've never gotten that feeling before. He was on the left side of the street, his car right next to the curb. In an instant, I knew what was going on. There is rarely crime where I live, and honestly, it still scares me to this day. I don't know why he was just sitting there, other than maybe he was a kidnapper. That night, my parents were going to be out, so I was home alone. It had just gotten dark when I heard the doorbell ring. I don't think I ever have been so scared in my life. After about a minute, I peeked my head into the hall, and it looked like my parents' car was out front. And so I assumed maybe they had gotten locked out of the house and answered the door. A lady stood there. I've never seen her before. She told me she lived down the street and was out driving earlier when she had seen me near the mailbox and the old guy following me. She pulled right up behind him, sitting on his bumper. She knew what was going on. She had come to my house to tell me she saw exactly what happened, and that she was close if I ever needed anything. To this day, it terrifies me, thinking about the fact that if she hadn't been there, outside driving at that exact time, I might have been in a completely different place now. Later that year, I had heard reports of a kidnapper a few blocks away from where mine was. Nothing has been reported on my local news about it, at least that's what I know of, so I can only hope he's gone now. In 8th grade or so, I was on Instagram, and there was this guy I was talking to, because I was vulnerable and stuff. He said he liked how I looked, which didn't make me scared due to pictures of my face I had on my account. I don't remember correctly what he said, but it went over the line at the time. I was 13 and my sister was 7. He said that he liked my jacket. I had this jacket which was my favorite because it was about a K-pop band. I got scared and it went further and further. He knew what color my mom and dad's car was. He knew what my sister looked like. He knew what my friends looked like. At one point, he called my sister hot. After a while, my mom found out I was talking to people, and she made me delete my account. Before I blocked him, he said he worked at a store near our school. After that, I couldn't come out of the car in the morning without feeling like there was eyes on me. Creepy guy who stalked me from his workplace, who called my 7-year-old sister hot. Let's never ever meet again.
My story starts 4 years ago, and is still kinda happening. Lucas was the bus driver who drove the kids from my village to school next to town every day. He always was the nice bus driver, as there was a grumpy and moody one who sometimes switched shifts with him. A lot of people thought he was cool and always polite. I was 17 when there was some heavy rain in the afternoon when I was on my way home and I arrived at the station in town. Lucas was already there. As he noticed me, he let me in the bus and we started a conversation. I felt uncomfortable first, but he was always a good talker, so the weird feeling had gone soon. At one point he asked me about my then ex-boyfriend. He saw us together and the two of them used to talk when he was still in school. He was 21 at the time, already working. I told him that we broke up and that it was for the better. Then we continued talking about school. We started to talk every now and then, and after a while he asked me for my phone number, so I could maybe text him if I'm late for the bus or I need a ride in general. I found out that he was married, had 3 kids. He claimed to be 33, but later he said over 40. I never really found out how old he actually was. The day after we exchanged numbers, he texted me that he was going to take a bath and said that there would be enough space for 2. I replied that he should ask his wife about that, and he then said, "She is out of town, so I am pretty lonely." We left it at that. One time later, like 2 weeks later, I saw him and a young girl during his break making out. I sent him a message telling him that it's not the way a married man should talk to younger girls. He replied that he had explained to me later his wife didn't want to have sex with him since the birth of his 3rd child. He has multiple young girlfriends all around my age. When I asked him why he wouldn't look for someone closer to his age, he replied, "Girl, you don't know where to find the honey. Girls your age need a proper man, someone who give it to them. Boys that age are no good. Girls are so sweet." We then talked about my ex, who he said was a nice guy, but could have never made me happy. I was a rebellious, moody teen, so I actually never listened to adults. Some things he told me made me think. I couldn't get it out of my head. I started to believe the twisted things he said to me. I thought he was in the right and it would be better for his marriage if he would have little girlfriends. The next day, I had school until the evening. I had to take the last bus home, and because my sleeping schedule was terrible, I fell asleep in the bus. I woke up when the bus was already empty, Lucas standing next to my seat. It was already dark outside, so I had no idea where we were. He sat down, started talking, and kissed me at some point. I asked him to stop, and that I wasn't here to become one of his girlfriends. "Then why did you stay in the bus?" "I canceled someone else for you. You don't want me to be sad, do you?" And for some stupid reason, I believed him. He was the adult. He was in the right. We had sex because he made me feel guilty. I felt terrible afterwards and wanted to stop contact, but he was the one who brought me to school every day, so it was difficult to avoid him. The entire thing went on for months. Him making me feel guilty, giving me compliments, making me feel worthless at the same time. Showering me in presents and telling me that he invested so much money in me, and it would be rude to say no to him because of that. He wants me. I'm the best he ever had. I am not allowed to leave. The time I managed to get out of the situation is because of my cat. When I tried to sneak back into my house, she started meowing. and my parents woke up, took my phone, and found the not yet deleted messages from him. They were furious. I was angry and tried to defend him. I did not want him to get in trouble. They made me change my number and read through the phone calls I made, checking that his number wouldn't show up again. I met him again. He forced me to give him my new number, and he texted me with a different one. My father noticed the amount of texts to a new number, but believed me that it was for a school project. I asked Lucas to stop, that it's too dangerous. I met my new boyfriend for a few weeks after that, and managed to end things with Lucas, for now. I changed my number again, but he got it somehow, probably from my ex. I changed it again. A few weeks later, I saw his car in my neighborhood. He did not know where I lived exactly, but he was pretty close to my house. I managed to hide myself. Later, I got a text that he was in my village, hoping to see me. He somehow got my number again. I changed it one last time, and it suddenly stopped. I thought that would be it. Fast forward to May last year. I'm 21, have a different boyfriend who happened to live close to Lucas' house. One day, he saw me. He texted me again, telling me that the same things he did all the time. I was scared. I had no idea how he managed to get my number again. It must have been my ex, who happened to be in the same theater group, but I never actually gave him my number, so he probably asked around and then told Lucas. My boyfriend noticed my reaction, and I finally told someone the whole story. He couldn't understand how I could still defend Lucas. His manipulation was pretty good. I almost gave in and agreed to meet Lucas. The next day, I saw his car in my village a few times, received text from him, and somehow managed to tell him to leave me alone. I moved to another town and blocked him everywhere. It's been since July 2016 that I last heard of him, and I am in therapy now. So, I hope it's the end of the story, and I will never see him again.
The story that I am about to tell happened because I guess that I am too nice to people. When I was 17, I was a pretty blonde girl who was very nerdy. I would often get guys who wanted to be more than just friends when they found out I liked games and films, but they always just made their crushes known, and I would gently let them down. I had a high school boyfriend at the time. I worked at a movie theater in the Midwest. I loved this job and became good friends with the people I worked with. It was the perfect job for a teen who loved movies and needed to work after school. That was until I met Simon. Simon was a guy who worked at the theater with me. He seemed nice enough, a little geeky and not very attractive, but kinda just a regular guy, and I was friendly, as I always was. He was almost 10 years older than me, so I wasn't too worried about him thinking I wanted to be more than just friends. As time went on, he gave me more and more attention, talking to me for hours during the downtime when movies were playing. I suspected that he might like me, but I wasn't too worried as he was a manager and I wasn't, and dating between managers and staff was not allowed, so I thought he would just keep it to himself. Then after a year, I was asked to move to another theater as the one I worked at would be shutting down in a few months. I agreed, but I was the only member of the staff to be offered this option. I realize now that this was not as fortuitous as I thought it would be. Just a week after I started at the new theater, Simon showed up to say hi. I was friendly as always and was nice to him. After all, we were the same movie chain, so he would come here to watch movies for free if he wanted to. I thought it was innocent, but soon started to feel uncomfortable with all of the time Simon was spending hanging around at my theater. I asked my coworkers if he came in when I wasn't there, and they said no. Then it dawned on me that we no longer worked at the same theater, so he was free to pursue me romantically without worrying about his job. This made me worry, as he started outwardly, if not awkwardly, flirting with me. I found out later that a girl at my job, who didn't like me, had given Simon a copy of my schedule for the next 2 months, so I started to hide. Every time I saw him, I would make some excuse to go and hide in the stockroom or the projection booth. It was starting to make me very uneasy. My boss, who's still a great friend to me, noticed how uncomfortable I was and told me if I wanted, I could report it to the home office to get him to stop. I thought this was taking it too far, and I declined, thinking eventually that he might give up. Well, he did not. He came in close to my birthday and dropped off a card and a CD with lots of rather creepy music on it. I had finally had enough and told my boss to report him. Management told me he wasn't allowed to come to my theater again, or he would be fired. I didn't see him for a few months. I thought it was over, but then I had people I worked with at the old theater who went to high school with me coming up to me in the halls and cussing me out for getting Simon in trouble. They said that I had led him on and that he was a lonely guy who had a crush, and it was cruel that I got him in trouble, or that I wouldn't give him a chance. I was horrified that he had been spreading these rumors to people I thought were my friends, and were now attacking me at school. I spent the next few months afraid to go anywhere. I lived in a small town, and was terrified of going out in case I ran into him. I am generally a nervous person who scares easily, so my parents thought I was overreacting. My boss told me not to worry, and that Simon probably had given up on me. Oh, how I wish that had been true. The day the old theater closed down, I was at work. I had to work late, and me and my boss were the last ones to leave for the night. My boss Peter asked me to wait for him so we could lock up together. It was about 2 a.m. once we left. The doors had been locked since 10 p.m. No customers could get in. As we walked out, my boss, who had a kind of sick sense of humor, was joking about Simon and his crush on me, probably trying to make light of it to cheer me up. When we stepped outside, I turned to lock the door, and my boss shouts, "There he is!" I thought he was joking again, and turned to tell him it wasn't funny, but he wasn't joking. Simon was standing there, with just Peter between us. I froze. My entire body went rigid. I didn't know what to do. I heard Simon say my name, and saw he tried to get around my boss, but Peter spread his arms out and blocked him for me. I saw that his eyes were fixed on me. Peter told Simon to get out of here and that I didn't want to see him. I struggled to unlock the door, which was notoriously sticky to get open. I could hear Simon trying to get my attention, but I just focused on the lock. Finally, it gave way, and I rushed inside, running for the office, which had a deadbolt security door. I unlocked it and sat inside, hyperventilating. Peter came in and shut the door, checking I was okay. He told Simon to go home and not to come back, or he would call the cops. We sat in the office and waited for what seemed like forever. Peter then said that he would go and check out to make sure that he had left, and I stayed in the locked office. A few minutes go by, and I hear Peter's voice telling me that he was coming back in. When he opened the door, he looked furious and headed straight for the phone. I asked what was going on, and he said that Simon was still out there. Apparently, he had parked in the shadow of the theater where it is hard to see. He parked in such a way that I would have had to walk past him to get into my car. He had parked his van, a van I didn't know he had in the shadows. Peter had found him crouched down beside the van, as if waiting for something, waiting for me to walk by. Peter had shouted he was calling the cops and ran back inside. By the time the cops showed up, he had left. They took a statement and Peter told them all Simon's contact information as he was still in the system. We guessed he showed up today because he is no longer at risk of losing his job as the theater had closed down. I never saw Simon again, but that doesn't mean that I wasn't terrified that I might run into him again. I spent the whole year until I moved away terrified I might run into him again. I never did, but it did ruin what should have been a great summer before I left for college. I hate to think what would have happened if my boss hadn't been there that night, or hadn't been smart enough to check that Simon had left. I am still good friends with Peter. He even came to my wedding. I owe him an unknown debt. And to Simon, wherever you are, let's not meet again.